Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of June of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about massive missile strike that took place during the previous night and this morning. On this map in front of your screen you can see the main roads of attacks that the Russians were using, and as you can see the main concentration of Russian fire took place in the western part of Ukraine, more precisely in the vicinity of the airfield Starokonstantinov. The Ukrainians reported that as a result of air defense work, they managed to bring down almost everything the Russians launched. They destroyed and brought down every single caliber F16's missile and every single drone. The only thing Ukrainians haven't managed to bring down is the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. But of course the Russians have completely different reality, they have completely different report. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation today reported that this morning the armed forces of Russian Federation delivered a group strike, and according to the Russians they managed to destroy and they managed to hit the Ukrainian airfield infrastructure where Western made aircrafts were planned to be stored. The goal of this strike has been achieved. All the assigned targets have been engaged. So this is the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, and if we go back once again to the map of roads, you might see that not just Starokonstantinov was under very heavy fire, also the airfield in the vicinity of Poltava, in the vicinity of Mirgorod. So two airfields were damaged by the Russians according to this report. I don't know whether the Russians managed to destroy the airfields and to damage, I'm not sure, but I know for sure that by the 27th of June, there are still no F16's on the territory of Ukraine. As for Kiev and political events, we have another very important statement, very important report that we have from Zelensky. Ukraine does not want to prolong the war. We do not want it to last for years. We have many wounded and killed on the battlefield. We should put a settlement plan on the table within a few months. So this is the report from Zelensky, and this is the first, let's say, statement from his side when he accepted and agreed that the peace plan negotiations with Russia should have started. Also, we have report about another agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have a lot of very interesting report from Kharkiv area, and probably the most important, maybe, and very unexpected reports today we received from a small village by the name of Sotnitsky Kazachok. This morning we got a report from pro-Russian sources that the Russians has begun a new breakthrough on the border of Kharkiv and Belgorod regions. Battles began to boil in another area near the village of Sotnitsky Kazachok. So we got this report somewhere at noon time. It was very difficult to understand what exactly was happening there, but later the pro-Ukrainian mappers have adjusted their maps, showing this territory as a part of gray zone. As you can see, this is not like the territory of complete Russian control, it's just a gray zone because the situation there is covered with fog of war. I believe that during the next few days the situation will be resolved and we will understand whether the Russians managed to enter and capture the village or not, and that was just a fight between sabotage groups or something like this. Anyway, summarizing everything, this is the first village, let's call it like this, on Zolochiv direction. If you remember, during the previous days, at the beginning of Kharkiv offensive, we were talking a lot about possible directions, about some reconnaissance intelligence information, about MI6 report, and many other things. And there were experts, military experts, who were stating that the Russians are targeting and heading towards Zolochiv. So this is also like Volchansk, like Liptsy, another town, another, let's say, based core town for, let's say, barriers or buffer zone, at least in the northwestern part of Kharkiv. Very important video we got from the village by the name of Avdiivka. The video was published by the Ukrainian sources. In this video we can see MiG-29 of armed forces of Ukraine, and this MiG-29 was bombing the Russian positions with, let's say, aviation bombs Hammer of French production. So telling the truth, this is the first video of the type showing us the use of Ukraine aircrafts with something like Fab and Alex, and this is also also the reason why the Russians were bombing the Poltava and Mirgorod airfields with the purpose to destroy the bases of these MiG-29 that are able to carry HIMARS aviation bombs. Now let's move to the line of combat contact, and let's start from Gluboka. As you can see, there are no changes, just few updates regarding some attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack. All of those attempts were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. As for Volchansk direction, during the previous video we were talking a lot about engineering constructions that the Russians are building right now along the territory, along the buffer zone, and we have lots of videos and lots of evidences confirming that since the beginning of the battle in Kharkiv, the Ukrainians managed to destroy up to 15 engineering machines. And first of all, this confirms that the Russians are not counting losses among engineering machines. They tried to build as many as possible trenches in the fortification before possible Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. Now let's talk about Volchansk itself. As you can see, we have a lot of geolocations, and probably the most important piece of news is that according to the Group of Forces North, since the beginning of the previous 24 hours, the Russians made many first attempts to storm the Volchansk citadel itself. So those we got start receiving first updates about this. I know that I have no doubts about this, because we continue receiving significant number of videos from the inside of citadel itself, and this is another day, another episode of how the Russians were bombing and basically reducing this stronghold till ruins. Maybe from this angle, from this video, it's very difficult to understand the current status of the stronghold, but if we take a look in this video, we're gonna see the real situation, and according to the buildings, according to how there looks like right now, we can make a conclusion that the Russians managed to destroy up to 90% of the buildings. Yes, we still can see walls, we still can see some cores and bases of the constructions, but most of these buildings are not valid for, let's say, deployment of forces and many other things. So first of all, the Russians are about to reduce the citadel till ruins, and as soon as the Russians are able to do this, then they will start the next phase of Volchansk offensive operation. Maybe not. They will try to pass through this area, and then if they're able to do this, then the Russians will be able to answer the operational space of low-rise building of low-rise part of Volchansk. Very important video. For example, in this part you may see that after another strike, almost a part of the building collapsed automatically. So no chances for the Ukrainians. Another part of the building collapsed and fell down. So I believe that there are Ukrainians, but mainly some squads that control the situation around, but there are not so many forces inside. It's very difficult to stay there under very heavy fire, and of course nobody wants to stay under the ruins if another FAB arrives, or FAB 3000. For these purposes, and the reason why the Ukrainians currently are trying to concentrate and to keep main forces in this area, because the Ukrainians need to keep some forces as close as possible to northern part of Volchansk, and using this territory, the Ukrainians continue redeploying their forces from the south in the northern direction. The Russians understand everything, the Russians see everything, and as soon as they get and see another batch of Ukrainian soldiers, they start bombing and attacking them with all types of weapons they have. So for now the situation is very difficult for both sides, either for the Russians and for the Ukrainians, but despite some progress on the ground, we see that the situation currently plays in Russian favor. And even if the Russians still haven't managed to, let's say, capture the citadel, or the Russians were forced to fall back from some part of Volchansk, we know that every single square kilometer, let's say, between Volchansk, Pletionovka, Gatishe, Agurtsovo itself will be completely turned into another layered fortification area without any chances for the Ukrainians to go through this area towards the border. Now let's move further. We're going to in the northern Kupyansk direction. As you can see, during the previous day we got significant number of geolocation, another batch of geolocations of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the main Ukrainian positions. When talking about this year, it's very difficult to make any conclusions based just on one day. It's good to increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of the month, and based on this picture, we can make conclusions that the Russians are bombing and damage the Ukrainian positions mainly along the railways between Kislovka, Kotlarovka, and then Pyshanovka, Kurilovka. So this is one of the most concentrated area of Russian fire. Another Russian fire focus lays between Petropavlovka and Orlyanka, and the same story we can see in the vicinity of Pishana, Tabaevka. As for this area, we see significant number of icons with blue icons with yellow skull, which confirms significant number of losses and destroyed Ukrainian artillery systems during the counter-artillery duels with the Russians. For now, without any changes on the ground, but the situation can be changed in any moment. Now let's move in the southern Kupyansk direction. We have additional updates from the area to the east from Zhiribets River, and according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensives, managed to restore control over some tree lines and some fields. So this territory, according to Ukrainian sources, is considered as the area that they managed to return control over. So for now, we don't have any geolocations to confirm this or not, so we will keep this territory as contested until we receive some updates. Now we are moving in direction of Seversk. We have small changes on the ground. The Ukrainian sources also reported about additional changes in the vicinity of railway station Avdiivka. The Russians managed to improve their flanks and to answer this tree line, and from this tree line the Russians are able to move further in the northern direction, which is obviously the Russians are planning to do in the very near future. Also, we have significant number of FPV drone strikes between Avdiivka, the village itself, and edge Russian positions, which also confirms about some clearing operation, about attacks on Ukrainian personnel carriers, and many other different types of equipment. So the clearing operation is ongoing. Very important updates are coming from Razdolovka. 3 different mappers confirmed almost complete control over the village. According to 2 reliable pro-Russian sources, the village was captured for, let's say, 90%, and this information was also confirmed by pro-neutral mappers. But every single mapper confirms that the Russians control just 90%. Deep State haven't confirmed this yet, but maybe tomorrow they will. And there is just one street left. It's Tolachkova Street that still remains under the Ukrainians. Anyway, the reports about control over Razdolovka we received, let's say, in the first half of the day on the 27th of June, so most likely by the time maybe you see the video, watch the video, the entire Razdolovka will be captured by the Russians. Anyway, regarding the situation in Razdolovka, we see that the Russian artillery focus is moving further and further in the northern direction, which also a part of, let's say, confirmation that Ukrainians are no longer in Razdolovka, and currently they try to dig in deeper and to hold positions on the line between Fyodorovka, Pirezhny, and then further in Seversk. Now we are moving to Chasiv. As you can see, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours, just the regular updates. But comparing the Chasiv citadel and Volchansk citadel, we can make a conclusion that there is still a lot of job to do for the Russians in Chasiv. As you can see in this video, the Russians were bombing with southern tower systems, but as for Volchansk Chasiv, the Russians also were using aviation bombs, and of course the Russians managed to damage the Volchansk citadel more than the Russians managed to damage the Chasiv. So we can make a conclusion that there is still a lot of job to do until the Russians are able to reach Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal itself. As for Druzhba, this area where the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense a few days ago, as for now we haven't received anything else, just the situation that we have yesterday, the day before yesterday, but we have very interesting reports from the southern part of New York. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. This information was confirmed by different mappers, mainly pro-Russian and one neutral, and as a result of offensive, the Russians captured the first stronghold in the first defense belt of New York, and currently there are very heavy clashes inside of New York. We'll see what is going to be next, and of course the clashes are going to be continued by the Russians, and maybe the next few days we're going to see additional progress and additional movements in direction of the central part of New York. Now let's move in Avdiivka area. We have a lot of very interesting updates, but most of them are about the clashes on the ground. There are still clashes, very heavy clashes inside of Sokol. The Russians control some buildings, they control some territory, but Ukrainians still have possibilities to send reinforcements, to send armored vehicles, support to counterattack the Russians, which confirms that the area is still contested by the sides. So nobody controls this territory for 100%. In this video we can see the work of Ukrainian Bradley, who was attacking the Russian forces from a very close distance. As for Novoselovka Persha, another day, another vehicle of Western production was destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strikes. Probably, if we calculate, let's say, the losses of vehicles of Western production in the vicinity of Novoselovka Persha, in this artillery pocket, and the number of Western vehicles that Ukrainians lost during the battle for Robotyne, I believe that in this area the Ukrainians lost maybe twice as more in comparison with Robotyne. Because if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of months, we're gonna see hundreds, maybe already tens icons of destroyed vehicles, artillery systems, and mainly of Western production. Now we are moving further and we are going to Krasnogorovka because we have a lot of very interesting updates, and according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the eastern part of the stronghold. So according to mappers, the Russians improved their positions and take under control these fortifications, trenches, and many other military infrastructural objects. I'll remind you that just yesterday the mappers reported that the Russians entered the citadel, Krasnogorovka citadel, and today we got report that the Russians entered this area. I would like to tell you that this progress of armed forces of Russian Federation doesn't have anything common with some offensive operations or assault operations inside of the citadel. Mainly, this Russian progress is connected with decision that Ukrainians made during the previous days. Due to the Russian progress in the western and northwestern parts of the strongholds, the Ukrainians decided to abandon their positions in the citadel and the inside of the eastern fortifications. This was the Ukrainian decision because they understand that most likely they are no longer able to hold the territories due to the risk of being encircled by the Russians. So this is the situation, and this is the reason why the Russians managed to capture significant territories just within one day, mainly because of and due to retreat process of the Ukrainians. Now let's move to the south Donetsk direction. We have very interesting reports, and first let's take a look at this video. In this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces inside of the town by the name of Kurakhova. As you can see, there are a lot of cars, lots of vehicles, and at this moment in this episode we see some smoke, some fire. Basically the Russians start bombing this territory with artillery, maybe with FABs, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians of course suffered losses, at least among vehicles. Later we got very interesting report from Ukrainians of 79th Brigade. As usually, they provide us lots of very interesting insights, and the 79th Brigade reported that there has already been an incident that in Russian captivity pencils leak a lot of information. So the Ukrainians call pencils and newly mobilized forces, and probably due to their haircut, so they look like pencils. Now artillery strikes have hit our internal traffic control point in Kurakhova. The cars were destroyed, and in addition a dozen experienced guys were lost. So as you can see, if we take a look at this video once again, we're gonna see lots of vehicles and cars in this area. So the 79th, the force of 79th Brigade commented this situation and blamed the newly mobilized soldiers in this failure. And this is a very dangerous situation that currently we can see among the Ukrainians, because the situation is as following. After the Ukrainians announced a total and massive mobilization, they start basically kidnapping people from the streets. We saw significant, I believe you've seen significant number of videos of how another day a man with his kids were walking through the streets, and then some car arrived and stopped nearby and took him, and a few minutes later he found himself somewhere in another recruit center. So what we can say about this person, about this let's say about this man, of course he hates this power, he hates this system, and obviously the only thing he thinks about how to get the line of combat contact, how to surrender as fast as possible, and how to provide as many as possible information to the Russians to finish the conflict and to damage those people who sent him on the line of combat contact, basically for a certain death. So this is the situation, and this is not the only case. If you remember, just a few days ago we were talking that Ukrainians of 46 Mobile Brigade sends soldiers inside of Krasnogorovka with closed eyes, so trying to reduce the level of information these soldiers can receive during the redeployment process from the military bases, from military schools towards the line of combat contact. We see this situation everywhere, and this is the main problem of Ukraine, because nobody from recently mobilized people want to fight, and once again, as soon as they get on the line of combat contact, they try to find a way how to surrender. We have additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation in the southern Konstantinovka direction. Today the Russian soldiers, the Russian forces, published the video of work of 39 motorized brigade. In this video we can see how the Russians were storming the Ukrainian positions, how the Russians were moving through the minefields under very heavy Ukrainian artillery fire, how the Russians managed to break this defense belt, how the Russians didn't scared, and how the Russians entered the line of combat contact in the Ukrainian fortifications, where the Russians landed its infantry, and then the main clashes began. So this video was geolocated, and according to information we have, the Russians captured this territory, and we have improved the map. Furthermore, if we calculate the distance, we see that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the main supply road of Ukrainians of 524. So there are around 2.5 kilometers left, and the Russians will establish physical control over the main supply area. Now let's move to Prichistovka. We got another day and another FAB arrived in the village. This is a very important video. I would like to give you some interesting analysis. I know that this village, the Russians haven't been bombing this area for a very long period of time. Probably since 2023. The last time the Russians were bombing this territory so much took place in September or in August or July of 2023, when the Ukrainians were conducting their greatest counter-offensive operation, and Prichistovka was one of the main supply hubs, the supply roads that Ukrainians were using. For example, if we increase the numbers of days since the beginning of June, we're gonna see significant number of geolocations, which confirms that the Russians are very interested in attacking this territory. Furthermore, if you ask my opinion, I connect this increased Russian activity in this area also with significant number of recently mobilized soldiers who surrendered the Russians and provided them additional information about the positions of Ukrainian command centers and many other important military objects. But for example, if we increase the numbers of days, or if we change the numbers of days since the 1st of May till the 31st of May, we're gonna see from the same town just 3 geolocations. Just to take a look and compare that, just within a month, the Russians improved their number of strikes in this area till, let's say, 3 times more, or maybe 4 times more in comparison with May, in June with comparison with May, which confirms that most likely the Russians are preparing this village before the beginning of offensive operation in this direction as well. This is a very important town because using this area, the Ukrainians continue supporting their forces from Bogayavlenka towards Prichistovka, Zolotaya Niva, so it's very important to cut this logistic road before further offensive towards Velika Novoselovka. As for this area, the Russians continue bombing and pummeling the Ukrainian positions. lots of artillery strikes, lots of aviation strikes, lots of FPV drone strikes. And today we also got very important video from this part of Ocheretyne. In this video that was published by the Russians, we can see the Ukrainian who was running away from the southern part in the northern direction. So this is the first evidence confirming that Ukrainians began abandoning and leaving their positions without receiving any orders, and the Ukrainians with the small groups are moving from the south in direction of Blagodatne. So most likely the days of Ocheretyne are numbered, and very soon this small village, or the things that left from the village, would be captured by the Russians. As for Kherson direction, we haven't received anything. I'm talking about Zaporozhye part. As for Petykhatki, Zherebyanki, as for this area, I remind you that according to some military experts, this is also possible area of another Ukrainian offensive operation. The Russians continue bombing and attacking this territory, trying to get the concentration of Ukrainian forces. So another day, another video from this direction confirming that Ukrainians concentrated lots of forces in this area. As for Dnipro River, we haven't received almost anything, just few FPV drone strikes, some artillery strikes, and many other things, but the most important is this video. And in this video we can see how the Russians using FAB 1500 destroyed another Ukrainian ammo depot or headquarters on the Ukrainian side of Dnipro River. Very big explosion, and this is exactly the situation that is taking place all over the line of combat contact. Complete Russian superiority with aviation, and the most important, with weapon that this aviation use. More and more details, and very interesting details, we are receiving from the Black Sea. If you remember, during the previous few days, we talked a lot about the NATO Global Hawks, United States Global Hawks, who was flying in this area, and there were lots of reports that the Russians managed to bring another or two or one Global Hawk down. And of course, after these reports, the Western countries and the NATO countries decided to improve their defense, and now if there is a reconnaissance aircraft, it is always under support and under protection of two fighters. So the NATO countries, to prevent the situation from very bad cases, decided to improve their group forces here, trying to, let's say, avoid unnecessary losses and unnecessary escalation, possible escalation in the future. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.